Hello, welcome to Section 2, Module 3 of the Bibble IT training videos for the Windows 7 exam 7680. Today we're going to be having a look at how to deploy a system image. Basically what we'll be doing today is the reverse of what we did in Module 1. Module 1 was all about how to capture an image. This time we're going to be deploying that same image back to one of our workstations. We're going to discuss the different types of deployments and different types of images that are available, and some of the tools we're going to be using today are the MDT, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, WAIK, and we'll be discussing briefly System Center Config Manager. So there's two main types of deployments that you'll come across. The terminology is either a light touch deployment or zero touch. The differences between them: in a light touch deployment, the admin or the user who's doing the actual imaging will need to provide some information at a stage during the deployment. So you can't just set the thing away and come back and find it at your Windows desktop. With a zero touch, that's where you don't have to provide any information. Everything's in there as part of your task sequence, as part of your image deployment steps. Commonly, the sorts of information that you would have to provide during a deployment if you're doing light touch might be things like credentials for accessing the image or the application shares or the machine name, whereas in a zero-touch deployment you don't have to provide any information at all. Zero-touch deployments are what you can get if you use SCCM, which is System Center Configuration Manager. That's mainly because Configuration Manager already knows most of the information about the machine. So in a typical case, you're deploying an image to a workstation that's already part of your Config Manager deployment, but you're carrying out a refresh of your workstations, in which case Config Manager knows all the original stuff about the workstation, so like its name. It's worth mentioning as well that with MDT it's not actually possible to get zero touch deployments. The maximum you can get is to a light touch, where there's very little information required as part of your ongoing imaging process. Okay, the other thing we're going to discuss is the types of image deployments that you can do. There's two main types, either basic or full. With a basic image, you've done very little customization to your reference workstation that you captured. This provides a lot more flexibility because this is like a baseline image that you can then deploy in different ways using different things called task sequences. We're going to come on to task sequences on the next slide, but basically the idea is that you choose what image you want to deploy onto your hardware, and then you set up a bunch of steps to go through customizing it. So things like naming it, joining it to a domain, installing certain applications, installing certain driver packages, those sorts of things. So in a basic image, it's a lot more flexible for use in many different task sequences. So if you've got different applications that need to be installed for your, say, your HR department or for your accounting department, you can do one basic image and then just set up different task sequences that would install the different customized applications they would need. That does, however, mean that it would take longer to complete because you're not just deploying an image that's ready to go, you're deploying a baseline image and then making lots of customizations to it. Whereas with a full image, before you captured your image, you deployed everything that you needed, so it's all ready to go. So it's much quicker to deploy because you're not having to do many customizations. You're literally just putting on your image that's ready to go. So you'll end up with an HR image, an accounting image, a developer image, all those sorts of things. Now, which approach you take really depends on what your imaging strategy is or what your organization is trying to achieve. You might well find that you'd end up with a hybrid where you've got a basic image that you can use for most of your deployments and then full images when you're doing something special. Or you can do a halfway house, again, between basic and full, where you have a basic image that you use for deploying and automating the capturing of your full images. That means when one of your packages changes, you'll have a special task sequence that'll go run, will deploy your basic image, make the customizations you need, and then capture it back as a full image ready to deploy. Okay, so task sequences. Task sequences are things that are used in MDT and also in Configuration Manager. They allow you to specify exactly what the process is that's going to happen during your capture or during your image deployment. The basic outline of a task sequence is you specify how the machine's going to be booted, be that with Windows PE, you can specify a PE image, or if you're going to boot it up your own way using a USB stick or over the network, you don't need to detail that. You then choose how you're going to partition your base hard drive. You choose what image you're going to deploy onto it. You then customize windows inside that, so things like setting up the username, the company name, what product key it's going to use. You can apply drivers from a repository, a centralized repository where you've set up everything in advance. You can apply packages, so deploy applications to it. And then you can put it through Windows Update to pick up any patches, or you can deploy certain patches as packages if you want to. So task sequences provide you with quite a lot of flexibility around deploying images. What I'm going to do is just quickly hop onto one of the servers. This server here is a deployment server. It's been set up and had the MDT package installed on it. This is just the deployment workbench that we're in at the moment, and I've created a deployment share here. I'm not going to go into great detail about MDT because for our exam you need to know about MDT, but you don't need to know specifically the ins and outs of it. So all I've done in here is under our operating systems, this is our Windows 7 image that we captured in module 1. All I've done through in here is import the operating system so it's ready to go. And I've also gone through and set up a basic task sequence. This task sequence is based off one of the defaults, but if I just show you the steps that you get here, so this will be task sequence 2, task 2. You can then choose a template. So from here, this is what I'm saying, where you can start with a capture task sequence. So this will go and capture your image. This would be if you were doing module 1. You can start from a basic client replacement, so you're capturing all the information, the local user settings off the workstation, deploying a new image and then putting all that stuff back on. You can start with light touch OEM task sequence. I recommend the first time you have a look at this, just try the standard client task sequence, and then you can go through, specify what image operating system you want to deploy, product keys, operating system settings, etc. If we cancel that and just have a look at the one that I've already created, you can see down here there's a bit of metadata around this image. So what sort of platforms is this allowed to run on? And then this is the meat of it here. This is our actual task sequence. So you can see these are the steps that are going to be run through in order from the top through to the bottom. And it's been split up into different folders here for the different stages. This is exactly as it's already been created by MDT. I haven't done any customizations to this. You can see here in the install phase, this is where we're choosing our operating system. We're specifying what disk, what partition. In our pre-install, we've got stuff for setting up and how we're going to partition our disks, all those sorts of things. So as you can see, quite a lot of flexibility in here. We can also add in installing applications. So I'd choose here what application I want to install. I would have to set it up back in MDT here, again using another wizard, new application, and then I can import things like my drivers as well. So MDT is a really powerful tool for managing and looking after your deployments. I suggest you go and have a look at it. It's about a 10 meg download. Configuration Manager is also able to do quite a lot of this stuff, but MDT provides a few extra advanced features. So if you're already using Config Manager in your environment and you'd like to get the benefits of MDT, but also have the benefits of doing zero-touch deployments like you can with Config Manager, you can actually integrate the two together. So what we're actually going to do today is we're going to deploy an image. We're going to do the reverse of Module 1, and we're going to use the same Windows PE environment that we created then. So we're going to boot up our workstation from CD. We're then going to use diskpart to clean the disk, delete all the existing partitions, set them up ready for our image deployment. We're going to use ImageX again, but this time we're going to use the /apply switch, then provide it with where our source WIM is. And if you can recall, WIM files have multiple image or can have multiple images in them, so we're going to specify which image and then what destination we want it to go to. If you want to, you can run it with the /verify switch. That means it'll have to go back and check and make sure that everything matches what it, as it does on the disk from what was in the image. So that will increase the time of your deployment. And then last thing we're going to do, very important, is we're going to make the drive bootable. As we've run through before, ImageX is purely a file-based imaging format, so there's no way for it to make changes to the disks. So if we just deployed ImageX, our image, and then didn't make it bootable, our machine's not going to be able to do anything. It's not going to boot up properly because there's no boot sector on the start of the hard drive. So this here's our reference computer. So we're just going to boot that up and boot from CD. And just wait for Windows PE to load. Okay, and here we have it. So if we go to the C drive and have a look at what we've got listed here, you can see this is the workstation as I left it with Windows and everything installed on there. If we go back to X, we're now going to use the tool called diskpart to clean all that file system up and remove all the partitions. So to do this, we just run diskpart, then you do list disk. So we can see we've got one disk in our system, disk 0, so we're going to select that to work with. Be very, very careful here if you've got multiple hard drives in your system or multiple partitions and you don't want to format them by mistake. Make sure you're very careful about what you're selecting here. We can also do list partition. And you'll notice the partition numbering actually starts from 1, whereas our disk numbering started from 0. So we're not going to select a partition, we're just going to run the command called clean. That's going to wipe all the information off this disk. So if we list the partitions again, you can see it's all completely blank. So now we're going to create partition primary. And then we're going to format, no, we're not. We're going to list partition and then select our new partition and then format fs equals ntfs. So we're saying our file system's ntfs, and then we're going to use quick just to make sure that runs through. Okay, there we go. So if we now list partition again, now we need to make this partition active. That means that the partition's flagged as being allowed to be the bootable partition on the disk. And then we're going to assign our partition a drive letter. If we exit out of disk parts, we should now be able to go to the C drive and list it, and you can see there's absolutely nothing on there. Okay, now I think it's the E drive, D drive even, sorry, is our CD. If we look on here, this should have our image X that we had before. So now we just need to map our network drive to our location that has the image folder. So we're going to do net use, and then I for image. And our username. And password. So if we look on our iDrive now, we should have our one Windows 7 image.wim file. Back to D, we're going to do image X / apply, and then I : and our image file. It's going to be image number 1 because there is only one image in this WIM. And then we're going to apply that to our C partition. You can see after it's had a bit of a think there that it's come up, and we're now getting an estimate for how long this deployment's going to take. Just while that's running through, it's worth noting the disk part tool, like I said, be very, very careful with it. But there is a help command that you can use at any time if you're unsure about any of the commands. Also, it's worth noting, this is one thing that always catches me out when I'm doing this in System Center Config Manager. Back in our task sequences, on the steps where you're doing the disk partitioning, so in MDT it's in a slightly different place, under Format and Partition Disk, it's always worth making sure you've got quick format enabled unless you really want to do a full file system format. Otherwise you'll be sat there waiting an awfully long time while format goes through. Okay, that's finished now. So if we go and have a look on our C drive, we should see all of our Windows folders and files in here. If we go into C, Windows, and then I think it's in System 32, we should be able to run bcd boot, and we're going to say that our source for our Windows boot files is C/Windows, and that should be it. Okay, successfully created our boot sector and all the relevant stuff for that. So if we now shut down and reboot our machine, we'll hopefully see it starting to load up Windows. So you'll notice here we haven't actually gone straight into our Windows desktop or our login screen. That's because one of the last things we did before we captured the image was we ran sysprep on it. So at the moment it's running through all the normal startup stages, things like checking for drivers for your hardware, making sure Windows is correctly configured, and doing any customizations if this was part of a task sequence. But I think you've got the point there. We've shown how we've deployed our image back, and this is the machine starting up fresh for the first time. So a quick summary then of the things we've looked at today. We've talked about the two different types of image deployments you can do. We've either got light touch or zero touch. Light touch being the best that you can get using MDT, zero touch requiring Configuration Manager. We also ran through a manual deployment process. The first thing we did was format the disk using diskpart. Then we used ImageX to apply our WIM image that we'd previously captured. And then we had to make the drive bootable using the tool BCD boot. So that's the end of our module. I hope you found that useful. Please feel free to leave me some feedback on the website. That's www.bibble-it.com. Thank you very much.